Doctors of Reddit, what are some of your worst experiences with anti-vaxxers? Veterinarian here. Had a client years ago who bred Seleucus and who fed raw, refused most medication cause chemicals bad, and didn't believe in vaccination. One of her dogs was exposed to parvo, and she brought it back to the kennel. She tried to treat it homeopathically herself at first, so by the time we saw it, the dog was already pretty far gone. Then the next day she brought in another sick dog, then another the next day, 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 then another the next day. All in all, after 6k in bills, 12 beautiful dogs died of a disease she could have prevented for $120. Standard stuff really. Had a kid on a ventilator with a preventable illness at a major research hospital in California. The mom was anti-vaccine. The kid began to deteriorate, and the mom spent a lot of time reaching out to her anti-vax community. One visited her in the hospital and said, "Honey, there was nothing you could do. I lost it at that point." Edit. By lost it, I mean that I had to physically leave the unit before saying or doing something unprofessional. I didn't say anything to the mom at the time. The kid recovered. Before they left, the IQ had a long talk with the mom about vaccines, and she agreed to do more research. God, I hope that woman and those like her come to their senses. 19-year-old comes on a gurney, deep coma, respiratory depression, foam issuing from the lips. Mother frantic. EEG reveals the pattern typical of subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, a sequela of common measles. It's preventable, people, but not curable. They buried him a few weeks later. Yeah, I'd rather my child get sick naturally than be exposed to chemical vaccines. A parent, after I spent 10 minutes describing to her in graphic detail all of the ways preventable diseases could maim and kill her infant. Student nurse here. The most heartbreaking case I ever saw was a 2 or 3-year-old who was facing all 4 limb amputations because he had meningitis and it entered his bloodstream, all because mom didn't vaccinate him. His limbs were completely necrotic, he couldn't eat, had an NG tube, and stopped speaking. You could tell he felt lonely and scared as hell. He got no visitors that I saw, even though he had 8 siblings and couldn't play with the other kids on the unit because he didn't know how to play without his hands. Crushed my heart. Edit. To everyone commenting that the meningitis vaccine isn't given until you're 11 plus, routine vaccination helps prevent it as well. The Hib and MMR vaccines both offer some protection from meningitis, as well as not living with 8 other unvaccinated children. While discussing vaccines with a mom one time and bringing up my experience working with the immunocompromised population, she said, "I don't care if someone else's kid has cancer. That's their problem, not mine." And that right there is a huge part of the problem: selfishness. I vaccinate my children not only for their own health, but for the health of others. I'm an EMT and pro-vaccine. My ex-wife is an anti-vaxxer. We are constantly arguing about vaccinating my son, but thankfully I have custody of him, so he gets his vaccines. She also thinks the government puts fluoride in the water to control our minds. Child A had an absolutely horrible time with chickenpox, to the point that I thought he might not make it. So what does she do? Intentionally expose child B to it. Not a doctor, but I work for a vaccine manufacturer, and my title is raw material engineer. I work with vaccine ingredients for a living. When a neighbor asks me, on social media or in public, if I know what's in a vaccine, I basically cackle and crack my knuckles. They also don't seem to have an answer for why I give my children the same vaccines if Big Pharma is trying to poison people. Edit. People keep asking to do an AMA, and I think that's a great idea. I'll make sure I do it very soon, but I want to wait for a time when I have enough time to dedicate to Reddit. And for those asking what's in them, that's a more complicated question. Depending on which vaccine, both the type and the brand, there are upwards of 100 different components that go in from start to finish. Pharmacist here. I don't get a whole lot of pushback. Most common is a fear of needles. All of my patients are 18 or older. I have had a few loons with a mind control conspiracy and a few. Vaccines do nothing but cause problems and I can tell you all about it. My staff and I laugh at them after they walk away. Then I die inside cause it is becoming more prevalent. There was an anti-vax mom who brought her kid into the and demanded that her kid be roomed right away and seen first because he couldn't be around all these sick kids. I commented on a blatantly false post about vaccines on Facebook, something about mercury in vaccines I think. Now there's only mercury in the flu shot, and you can request a dose without it. She sent me an article on how God doesn't want you to vaccinate children. She said she felt like God was leading her to spread anti-vaxxers information. Yikes. Pretty sure God would want less dead kids but okay. I'm not a doctor, but I do have mild autism. I made the mistake of saying that I was autistic in a public place to my friend. This lady heard and came up to ask if I was vaccinated. I said that I was, and she had the most triumphant look on her face. I realized my mistake and left right away with my friend. I went to a school that is known for its nursing program, so we had a lot of student nurses and RNs who would come back from their internships and jobs with anti-vaxxer stories. The worst one by far was a student who met a mother, who also happened to be in nursing school, that explained that she would not be vaccinating any of her children, and was mad she had to get a tuberculosis vaccine to work in a hospital. The student spent about 30 minutes trying to explain to this mother that she could easily kill her kids, to which she told her, at least they'll die naturally and not of mercury poisoning. Edit. The mother was confusing a TB test with a TB vaccine. I'm not a doctor, but I work in an urgent care clinic. I had a mom come in that complained about her son having nasty eye infections / pink eye lasting several weeks. She was vehemently against vaccinations, and when I asked if she had been giving her son over-the-counter meds she said, well I read online that breast milk would work, so I've been just pouring it in his eyes and I don't know why it's not working. Edit. A word. Well, we do have a measles epidemic around here every few years or so. Children die. It's getting worse. But I do believe the worst was my mother, pediatrician, coming home worried one day because Child Protective Services are looking into her. Why? She diagnosed an unvaccinated child with pertussis. Turned pale, told the mother she is too immediately to go in infectious ward. Called it in, like you do with most of these disease. Just procedure. And then, the mother was never registered at a hospital. She just sank back into a minority part of town. I don't think my mother has still seen those patients again. It's likely the child survived, or there would have been some sort of murmur. But yeah. Family physician here. It's not nearly as dramatic as you'd think. I tell mom what vaccines are due, and if she declines or delays them, I ask why. Whatever answer she gives, I tell her that her conclusion is not evidence-based and vaccines are beyond safe. If she still says no, I move on. I encourage her to return anytime to complete the vaccine series if she changes her mind. I try not to be judgy because that only reinforces the resistance. I live in California, so declining vaccines has sadly become more common. I'm a psychologist who works with kiddos who have developmental delays such as autism. Every couple of months I have parents who think that vaccinations caused their child to have autism. I present the facts, but ultimately they are not really interested in hearing the reality. Sometimes I think they just need something to blame. I can't say I wouldn't find something to blame if I had a child with autism. It is heartbreaking. I got slapped by a mom for disagreeing with her course of action. We've shamed people into recycling, picking up dog poop, and not littering, for the common good. I super judge anyone walking their dog without a plastic bag. I hope we can get to a place where we consider vaccinations a similar public good and refusal to participate is considered selfish and antisocial for similar reasons. Medical professional, not a doctor, and miles per hour student here. I'm visiting my family in a rural part of the US after a couple years of being away, explaining to them why they need their flu shots and why my 2-week-old niece should be vaccinated has become completely exhausting. I haven't got the flu shot in years and I never get sick. That's not how it works. Pediatrician here. As a medical student, I watched a baby die from rotavirus BC. Mom thought vaccines cause Alzheimer's. Yeah, not autism, Alzheimer's. And she didn't think he needed to go to the hospital when he hadn't kept down a feeding for 12 hours, because sometimes kids just do that. My current winner is a mom who refuses vaccines for her kids because they cause autoimmune disorders. Her 2 sisters have chronic Lyme and her brother has scoliosis, all due to those nasty vaccines. Oh, and her grandpa and dad both died from heart attacks because they had had the flu vaccine the previous season. All these autoimmune disorders in one family. I just don't know what to do. She likes to bring me articles from Mercular and Health Nut News to prove her point.